Hi, guys. I know there's just a couple people on here right now. We have an amazing team member of mine who just made a little bit of a mistake today when they sent the email out and scheduled it and said 3:30. So I think everybody thinks that I'm starting at 3:30, which is actually kind of good in a way because there's a whole bunch of questions I wanted to ask. A whole bunch of questions I wanted to ask you guys. A whole bunch of questions I wanted to answer. I'm just going to go through them now. But I was either going to make a video about them or tell everybody, hey, guys, I'm so sorry. I'm just going to start with these really important questions that haven't been touched on yet. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to take an opportunity to go through a whole bunch of these questions to answer them because there's some really wonderful ones. And it was people basically who submitted their questions ahead of time. So it's sort of this perfect opportunity to do just that. And keep in mind too, whenever you're coming into the webinar, if you can't make it or you're going to miss one, just like these individuals have been doing, you are more than welcome to submit your questions in the discussion forum inside of the members lounge. You'll see it's like forum, and then underneath forum, it'll say discuss, and there's Q&A, and there's actually two tabs. One tab it's two places you can basically post your questions. So I'm just going to go through both of these and just go through the different really amazing questions that came through. And it gives us a bit of a buffer before everybody jumps on at 3:30. And I'll still stay for the hour, and I'll probably still stay at an extra half hour later. So we've got lots of extra time today, basically. So first and foremost, I'm just going to start reading some of these questions. Hi, Chelsea. Hi, Jesse. And hi, Anna. So you guys are early. You guys are my my early individuals because we had just a miscommunication with the scheduling. So basically, I'm just starting a little bit early. And so you guys can totally ask your any personal questions that you're having. I'm really happy to see all you guys on here. And I'm just going to run through a bunch of the discussion forum questions, and then I'm just going to extend today's webinar a little bit later than usual too, so everybody can have their questions in real time also. So I'm just going to read through some of these, and if you guys have comments or questions about this, just let me know. This is sort of like a more personalized version for the first half hour until everybody jumps on at 3:30. So Tiffany Lee says, hi, how are you? I'm a fearful avoidant, and I'm having trouble letting go of someone I dated a while back. So I hear this a lot. This is why I wanted to bring this up here. I really want to talk to them, but I think it is too late. I'm afraid of what they will say or not say. She has already said that she's no longer interested in seeing me due to the way the relationship ended. It was a quick relationship. She said some things that upset me. I didn't know how to express my feelings correctly and was ready to leave one night. I had tried to talk to her to work things out. I didn't know how to, but I wanted to try. But I was so afraid because she froze and didn't say anything. She has some core wounds as well. I can tell you're doing your work, Tiffany. She has some core wounds as well that I struck by getting ready to leave. It was like we played off each other's reactions and thought the worst. So I took a look at her and thought, don't leave. But I did leave. Then I drove back to her house 10 minutes later, realizing that I should have stayed and told her how I felt, but she wasn't interested anymore. After a couple of days, I reached out. She told me that she was still not interested and that she doesn't want to see me again. I was hurt because she didn't want to try to understand me, and we fought via text, basically classic FA. So can't attend the one Tuesday for the DA, FA versus DA. Okay, beautiful. But replayed it last night. Beautiful. That's awesome, Jesse. I'm happy to hear that. And you guys can hear me okay, right? I have a new computer today and a new microphone, so I just want to make sure that I am audible as well. That's okay. You can only attend Saturdays. Okay, beautiful. You can always, Anna, submit your questions ahead of time too in the discussion forum. So I'm just going to go through a couple of Tiffany's parts here so far. She still has one more paragraph here that I'll read through, but I mean, this is so common to so many individuals, right? So number one, I just want to point out one really important point that she made. And she said it was like we played off of each other's reactions and thought the worst. And so this happens, right? Every relationship, I like to say, and I talk about this in the relationship mastery course, which by the way is out. So we have the relationship mastery course. And then next month we have codependency and enmeshment, which is super important for most attachment styles. Basically fearful, avoidant, and anxious, and even sometimes dismissive. That's sometimes why they become so dismissive, is they had felt very enmeshed in childhood, and their coping mechanism was to push off and push very far away. And then we have healing attachment trauma and core wounds from childhood, from parents, essentially. And it's all about like what behavioral elements were passed down. I group it into narcissistic personality parents, the 5 different parenting styles. You'll see yours pop up in there. And then any parents with addiction, anxiety, PTSD. So you can see like what characteristics you were likely to take on because of this, and then how to heal them and repattern them. So that's another wonderful course. And then we go into depression, trauma thoughts, and sadness, and how to alleviate this. This can be out of a breakup. This can be in so many different components of where depression or depressive episodes come up. So, and by the way, Chelsea, I hear ongoing really nice things about you from everybody. I just thought I'd add that in there because I just spoke with some of your friends and family this morning. So anyways, I got very distracted there for a moment. So I get too excited to talk about so many things. So basically, everybody has, and I talk about this in the Relationship Mastery course, everybody has these core wounds, right? So it's actually, I haven't seen this not happen yet. And I've worked with lots of couples along the way as well, and lots. And so what happens is usually we, for whatever reasons, attract or recreate, or a combination of both, people who are going to push our buttons, trigger our core wounds. And usually whatever response we have when we're triggered happens to trigger the other person's core wounds right back. So let's just say, for example, one really simple analogy is, let's say that one person has a fear of abandonment and the other person has a fear of feeling trapped or controlled. And the person who's afraid of feeling trapped and controlled is sort of going off, maybe at a party or a gathering, and the other person starts to feel, oh my gosh, they're not staying next to me, I feel abandoned. And then they come and maybe they get mad at the person or say, you have to stay closer to me, why are you doing that? And then the other person feels controlled. And then here they are in this vicious cycle, sort of feeding off of one another. And it's very common that this happens. So a really great question to ask yourself, if you haven't already, and you're watching this webinar, is sit down and notice, what, if I'm in a relationship right now, or if you just want to reflect on past relationships, what are our primary and secondary core patterns? And if you're out of a relationship right now, this is really good to know from your previous history, because you'll usually see it's the same 2 or 3 things, and you can become that much more aware of them when you re-enter into a relationship with somebody else. So notice, what were the core patterns? What was my biggest trigger, and how did my response trigger the other person? And then how did it feed into this loop? And look for the biggest one and the second biggest one. There's usually 2 major ones per relationship. So that was a really interesting point that Tiffany pointed out, because it's exactly true. So then you said you drove, then Tiffany says, I drove back to her house, realizing I should have stayed. And then she pushed off. She said, no, I'm not interested. And so she said, after all of this, the personal development work, boundary and trauma work, I have noticed a change for the better. I get both sides of the miscommunication. The one thing that I haven't changed is that I still want to speak to her. I've respected her boundary, except for reaching out a few weeks after we stopped speaking to apologize and wish her well, but I still think about her. Everything reminds me of her. I've sat in my feelings and recognized what they are. Good job. But I can't seem to figure out what she gives me. Wow, good job. I can tell you're really doing your work. But I can't seem to figure out what she gives me that I can't give to myself at this time. I began meeting my own needs, working on my guilt and shame, and I'm healing wounds and things I forgot I had. Should I reach out to her? My intention is to be friends since the compatibility component has been strained. Okay, this is a great question. So she didn't want to try to understand me, and we fought via text. Okay, good. So sometimes too, when we have this situation, a really powerful thing to do is to look for the other side, because the brain likes to always focus on the negative more than the positive. It's how it's going to try to protect you. It's like a survival-oriented mechanism that says, let me hyper-focus on the negative so I can prepare for the worst if anything negative comes. But what that can do is it can really sort of drag us down into the space of regret, into the space of what we did wrong, into the space of what wasn't enough. And so a really powerful thing to do, just as a perceptual shifter and equilibrator, that is part of like a lot of research around post-traumatic growth, And I'm going to count breakups as traumas here, because trauma is anything that your nervous system and emotional body can't, your subconscious mind, essentially from your emotions, can't properly process. And so they reorganize themselves around. So what happens here in the situation is we tend to just have this traumatic instance. And research shows around post-traumatic growth that one of the qualities that's consistent amongst people who bounce back from traumas and move ahead and heal effectively and quickly are that they look for, what were the lessons in the experience? How can I grow from this? What did this show me about myself? How did this basically serve me in some way? And it can sound like kind of a hard question when you're like, but oh, ouch, this was so painful. And it's not saying that it's not painful. It's saying, absolutely, I acknowledge the pain. And what's the other side? And asking that question is a great equilibrator. You might see that, in losing her, it forced you to sort of like connect to yourself. I right away think of like the Selena Gomez song that's on the radio, and it's like, I had to lose you to love me. So I can't help but distract myself from that. But truly, I mean, it's a powerful thing to say, and it's something that I see individuals go through all the time. It's like losing that relationship. It sounds like sort of set you on this track to more deeply understand this. So that's huge. And it's great that you're trying to meet your own needs. And then I would also look at any stories, any remnants of stories you're telling yourself after a breakup. This is for anybody. And working on those stories. Are you like, it's my fault, I'm bad? Anything there? Really important. And then if your last question in here is, should I reach out to her? My intention is to be friends. I think, why not? I think, if that's where you're at and you just want to have like a friendly situation, then maybe just say that. Hey, I just, I wanted to apologize again. I recognize my side. What's probably happened with this person is it sounds like they have a big abandonment wound as well, which is common on all attachment styles, just in different forms. It sounds like this person might be more DA. And a lot of DAs, once they feel abandoned, feel like, I can't ever expose myself to that level of vulnerability again. It's not your fault, Tiffany, if you're watching this. It is that person's inner wounding that they have to work through. And it's basically waiting to pop back up again if they don't work through those wounds. So I would definitely acknowledge that and maybe say something about that, but then say, I'm just offering my friendship if you're open to it. So that was a great question and a great set of comments in there as well. I love that you guys, there's some early birds on here. It's awesome. So I was just typing that. I'm still trying to figure out if my partner is FA or DA. Didn't make it Tuesday. We'll touch upon that night. Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Thank you, Chelsea. That's so sweet. So what are the, honestly, if you're trying to figure out if the person's FA or DA, if you see your partner, I think for sure a DA, just so you know. If you see the person being like very warm, very open, sharing very personal things, then that, and if they have this great ability to be present for long periods of time, very attuned to you, all that kind of stuff, most likely FA. And if they ever get anxious, if they experience anxiety, if you have two fearful avoidants together, you're going to see that they polarize sometimes. Maybe not in the first, month or two, but eventually you're going to see that person becomes anxious and you become avoidant. But if you find that you're constantly on the anxious side, chances are but you see yourself becoming avoidant sometimes, right? Chances are that you're fearful avoidant and this person's dismissive avoidant. And so you seem to identify more with the anxiously attached side of your attachment style. So great question. I hope that helps. Hi, Jessie. Thank you. I'm glad that you found my dog really cute. That's so sweet. So Nellie says, that's awesome. I'm glad you're watching like all, the webinars all the way through as well, Jessie. I find that DAs are so shut down to receiving information about attachment styles. Yes. For dismissive avoidance, they usually take to information if they hear around them that it's touching people. So if you're like, hey, this is the information and, this helped me in this way, and you share from like your point of view or from friends and family's point of view, then they tend to be open to hearing. But usually before that or up until that point, you'll see like a lot of avoidance instead. Because if it's like, hey, Magni, you're here. It's like so late there. I know. I think it's like 1 a.m. there probably. But yeah, so if you notice, right, usually there's this big sort of piece of the I fully just lost my train of thought. Usually the dismissive avoidant does not want to hear you saying to them, this is what you should feel, this is what you should be doing, this is what you should be trying. That will make them go really avoidant because they'll feel invaded, right? So just important to note. I agree, Nellie, you need to be very secure and confident to proceed. Yes. And you have to be really patient as well. Jesse, I think you're even secure and confident. They can't accept that there's work they need to do. I mean, they can. Sometimes dismissive avoidants will be really good at working on themselves, but usually there's a big, long warm-up period, right? Usually they've been exposed to the information. It makes a lot of sense in like a logical, analytical way to them. They see results of people that they know or online or something, and then they kind of warm up to it, and then they move at their own pace. I do get dismissive avoidant clients historically fairly often, not extremely often, but fairly often. I would say like 15 to 20% of the time historically that come by themselves, that just come because they want to work on themselves, and that's it. It's just less than everybody else. Hi, Shoku. Good to see you on here. I've been wondering, but he's done the work to become more secure, and I'm seeing the secure side as anxious because he's very open and vulnerable with me, but I'm realizing only me. That's beautiful. Yeah, so I mean, it sounds like he's working to be more secure in your relationship. Big time, big time. And if he's opening up and being vulnerable with you, it just means that like what you guys are doing together is working. Like, moving towards security happens quickly when, especially if it's juxtaposed, right? If he goes from dismissive to secure, you will read it as being kind of anxious. And when he's vulnerable with you, if you've made a safe space for vulnerability and you guys are talking about things and using tools and opening up and talking about wounds and using conflict resolution tools, I mean, you're setting the tone and the stage for a healthy relationship. So that's wonderful. It is also possible that he's really DA with everybody around him. So he's DA in the family, but FA with you, but still, I would still say dismissive avoidant overall, because DAs won't, you'll see even somebody who's FA, they might act dismissive with their family, but they might show up and like talk a lot and go like share a lot in these little bits and pieces, really vulnerable, really intimate things from themselves in these sort of bits and pieces, if that makes sense. So to me, I would definitely say it sounds like he's DA and has moved into a secure space, and you're registering that as anxious compared to what it was used to. But remember, it's a spectrum too. So he might just be DA and have some little fearful avoidant qualities here and there, but be moving into a secure sort of space. So good questions. Okay, I'm going to read these other few questions in here that people asked to submit for the webinar. So let me see. So Laura, sometimes for whatever reason, my computer takes me into the other chat in the forum. Okay, so a question for the webinar. So this is from Free. Free told me their name once, but I always remember people's screen names instead. It's because I'm an auditory and read-write learner. Another question for the webinar. Honestly, have you ever seen a DA get back with their partner after a breakup and make it work out long-term? Have you ever seen a DA get excited about a partner again after pushing them away for a long time? Yes and yes, I have. I would say it happens probably a little more than you would think. But it's not like a regular occurrence, but I would say maybe like 15 to 20% of the time. Usually there's a few key ingredients for this to take place. The breakup and the getting back together happens within the time frame that the dismissive avoidant is allowing themselves to feel their feelings. Usually it's around the 6-week kind of mark. There's usually some kind of fairly long-standing history in the relationship before. Usually it's not like, the person dated for 2-3 months and then this happens. Usually it was like they dated for at least a year before this took place. And the third important thing here is that usually the DA, if they're going to get excited about a partner again, they get excited, but it shows up in little blips. They like get excited and then they kind of withdraw, and then they get a little excited again and then they withdraw. And it's not like, remember, they're not wearing their hearts on their sleeves a lot of the time. So they may not be like emotionally like, I'm so excited to be with you, but you'll see little, like you'll see them trying, putting in the effort, putting in the action, and that sort of excitement, or let's say inspiration to move back towards the relationship, you'll see sort of show up in how they act, in the actions they take, and the things they do, those sorts of ways. So yes, people can break up and get back together 100%. I do see it happen a good chunk of the time, like probably a lot more than you would just naturally expect from what we know about DAs. Because sometimes they don't like to feel that wound of abandonment either, and they want to reconnect. I've even had to talk to people in the past and remind them, hey, you might get a good response that you're looking for when you threaten to break up with a DA, but it really wears the relationship over time. I've had this conversation with many people because some people even say it's only when I push back and threaten to leave the relationship that I suddenly get the feelings and the expression that I'm looking for from my dismissive avoidant ex. So that is an important thing as well. And then Free also says, there's a post on Facebook from an FA saying sometimes she doesn't feel attracted to her partner in intimate situations, that it's like the physical attraction disappears. She thinks it's a deactivating strategy. I wonder about this. Is this a normal deactivating strategy for DAs and FAs? Is it normal? These are great questions. Is it normal for a DA to feel less attraction when committing more, and to feel a lot of attraction when there's a breakup? Interesting. I didn't read these questions ahead of time. I just glanced and saw people said ahead of the webinar. So you're really on point there, Free. To feel less attraction when committing more, and to feel a lot of attraction once there's a breakup or similar. So the answer to this, and just you guys who are like logging in now, keep in mind, because I know a lot more of you guys are coming in. Hi, Marcelo. Keep in mind that we're officially kind of starting at 3:30. So this is going to be like a longer webinar. You guys are going to get lots of time as I go through these questions. So I'm going to answer this question, and then I'm going to answer Marcelo's question, and then I'm going to answer anybody else who posted above as well. So, okay, so what great questions there, Free. So number one, the way you will know if you're a fearful avoidant, if you losing physical attraction is a deactivating strategy or not, and then I'll talk about dismissive as well, is if it's coming and going. And if it's going when you're only upset about something, low level, like resentful, frustrated, feeling unheard about something, but it's not too high, or if you're feeling disconnected emotionally. I think somebody else, I won't say names, I'm going to be anonymous because I think that was important. But somebody else who I see in the group who's like really doing a great job at their personal growth and development journey asked as well something along the lines of, do FAs need emotional connection for physical connection? Do they go together? And absolutely, the fearful avoidants really do. But this is like really once they're in a relationship and they've opened themselves up. So fearful avoidants do have that anxious side. They can have this like, oh my gosh, if I'm feeling disconnected, usually this is how it goes for people. They go, if I'm feeling disconnected, it hurts a little bit. It makes me start becoming anxious. And then if I feel like that person's not reciprocating or trying to connect back, then it feels like a small rejection. And then I feel the need to close down, protect myself, and then push the other person away as a subconscious strategy to protect oneself. And as a result of that, that includes obviously sex or physical contact, right? It's like, ooh, we don't want to, it goes into the avoidance side. So when the physical attraction disappears, if it's disappeared for weeks and months on end, chances are, there's been enough maybe damage to the relationship that the feelings, or maybe you're just learning about the person enough and realizing it's not a fit. But either way, there's enough happening to the relationship that's causing this need to push away and deactivate. And it sounds like it's more final, right? If it's consistent, then it's like, okay, feelings have changed. The relationship's not working. That's not a good sign. And it's good to be aware of that. If the physical attraction is disappearing in a space where it's like happening in unison with your emotional state, or even when you're feeling disconnected from yourself, because our relationships to ourselves, believe it or not, deeply impacts our relationships to our loved ones physically. So if it's under any of those categories, then you'll know at that point that it's just a deactivating strategy, and it's the you going as the fearful avoidant from anxious to dismissive. Okay, because fearful avoidance basically have access to both sides of the attachment spectrum. And you'll notice too, right? Like if any of you guys in here are a fearful avoidant or know one, you'll notice like, anxious individuals tend to be a lot more emotional, expressive. Avoidant tend to be a lot more analytical, careful with their words, practical. Fearful avoidants are kind of both. They tend to be hyper emotional and hyper analytical. And it sort of balances them in the middle. They have access to both sides just from a personality perspective in those features as well. And so is it normal for DAs to feel less attraction when committing more? Yes, because it doesn't always happen. And if there's safety and consistency, you can sort of bypass that. But it's common that it happens for dismissives because the more vulnerable they are, the more threatened they feel, then the more deactivated they become on a quite regular basis. And they can start to pull back, and then it makes them question some of their feelings because they don't recognize this is happening. But what I will almost always see is then if somebody starts pulling away, the dismissive is like, whoa, wait, I really do care, because they're out of that like deactivating mind because of their fears of vulnerability that are subconsciously surfacing quite consistently. And do they feel attraction a lot more once there's a breakup or something similar? Yes, that does tend to happen. But remember, there's a difference between attraction and love. And so we want to, in a relationship, you want to create the dynamics that are going to help love to thrive. Of course, attraction as well, but love to thrive. And so we don't want to play off. Sometimes I think people get confused with love and attraction, and sometimes they play off the attraction, always trying to create the person being attracted to them instead of really harvesting that love that will eventually, once it's safe and committed and connected enough, produce a lot of attraction anyways. I hope that makes sense. So Marcelo says, hi, Thais, question. Do DAs misperceive themselves or fear as possibly being narcissistic? Yes, I see this all the time. Usually it's so interesting because I've had a lot of, I have coffee grains in my coffee. I don't think my coffee machine's working very well. Ew. Sorry. As I, over the years have had conversations and people say like, oh, this person might be a narcissist or that person might be a narcissist. Sometimes I'll read from the DSM, like, here are the qualities that would constitute. And whenever it's a dismissive avoidant person, I almost always hear them go, oh my God, is that me? But it's not. Narcissists are like, they can share some qualities, but dismissive avoidants do not want consistent attention all the time. That's not their thing. That's not what they are hoping for. They want attention and validation consistently, but in small bits. They don't have this excessive need for attention. They're not so grandiose. They're not so outgoing and charismatic as a means to get supply. They don't even like the center of attention. They want to be sort of on the outskirts. So there are some qualities where like both can be a little bit self-oriented, but for dismissives, it's out of survival, and narcissists, it's usually they're very self-oriented as a part of like a fundamental part of their personality structure. So there are a lot of differences, and I can go on. But dismissives sometimes can be a little bit entitled, but it's not always the case. And so that can be an overlapping quality, but those are really the only major ones. Let me just think for a second if there are any other major ones. I made a whole video about this on YouTube. And I know that's not really your question. You're like, hey, do they tend to fear or misperceive themselves? And the answer is yes. But when you truly look at the qualities that are used to diagnose narcissism, they're quite different from that of dismissive avoidance. While there are some that are overlapping, it's the excessiveness, the pervasiveness of the qualities that are overlapping that the narcissist does have that the dismissive avoidant doesn't. Like the narcissist feels consistently entitled and will exploit, and you owe them all the time, and they'll manipulate and turn things back on you. Dismissive avoidants really don't have any business manipulating. If they want attention, it's in small doses. It's not pervasive and excessive. So you'll see a lot of differences, not just between those 9 major traits, which you need to have 5 or more to qualify as a narcissist from the DSM. And I talk about this in great detail in a video. It says the difference between the narcissist and the dismissive avoidant or something like that. But also in the degree of expression of those traits, if that makes sense. So I hope that answers that question. It's a very good question, but they do fear a lot. I feel detached from my own feelings. The deep love for my dismissive avoidant feels like a distant dream. Hi, Shoku. I wonder if I've become a DA. I've never been like this. I've also been working very hard at the office. Is this so I don't feel? It's been a year now since he pulled away and shut down. We have not spoken since then. Yeah, it's interesting, Shoku, because I know a little bit about Shoku's situation from one of the earlier classes. And I think that you were probably you were on the very anxious side, but a little more FA because you weren't speaking up and you were a little bit resistant, I noticed over time, to sharing. So you're probably just in the avoidant. It doesn't mean that you've become dismissive avoidant. Definitely not. It means that you're just living in the avoidant side of your attachment spectrum. So what you really want to do is you want to make sure that you're nurturing that side of yourself by giving yourself validation, by connecting to your own feelings and needs intentionally and consistently, like showing up for yourself, asking yourself what you're feeling, what you're needing, being intimate with yourself through either meditation, journaling, things that are like deeply connecting you to you. And then you want to sort of expand from there. And you'll start to just feel like you're feeling again, you're connecting again. And those will all be very important things in order to feel like you keep progressing, in order to feel like you can be truly open and even like forgiving yourself for not reaching out or not saying something sooner. So I am just going to post in here really quickly. My webinar is beginning for anybody who is coming in. Okay, so I'm going to read these other 2 questions really quick that were for the webinar today. Okay, these are really good questions. And these are free. Put a bunch of other questions in there that I'll answer in the discussion forum. But Paulina says, I've got a question for the next live webinar about DAs and AAs interactions. So this is great for today. How do you re-engage with an ex-DA who broke up with you saying he can't do a relationship right now? He says it's stressing him out. He's too busy with work. He can't do anything for me and keeps letting me down. Aren't all my efforts to reach out going to ring a warning bell in his head that I'm unsafe to talk to because I must want to try to settle him down again? And how do I let him know I accept how busy he is? And although I'd like to spend more time together, it's not a deal breaker for me. So he believes it's genuine. I think what mainly contributed to the breakup was our lack of proper communication. So this is a great question. So number one, a very common trait I see with dismissive avoidance is that they can be very, they can feel, okay, so they tend to need a lot of alone time to basically rebalance and restabilize themselves. So if they feel like their plate is full, if they have a lot of work and things on top, even if they start to get strong feelings, it's more that instead of the strong feelings taking precedence over, the fears and the need for that survival mechanism to kick in and just sort of survive and get through and protect oneself and not be vulnerable just tends to take precedent over the strong romantic feelings. And honestly, until they work through that, it's really difficult for if he has this lifestyle where he's super busy for him to work through that. And so unless he's like doing active work on himself, and then it would be a totally different story. But in this case, I would say 2 things to anybody in this situation, but namely Paulina. Number one, I would not put too many of my eggs in this basket, because if he's saying like, hey, I can't be together because I'm too busy and I work too much, he's not that willing to work through the survival oriented mechanism that's popping up. And he's sort of prioritizing work, and he's not even willing to stretch his comfort zone at all. So, you're going to see probably a lot of disappointments in the future from your expectations to his expectations and what he's going to give. So you just want to make sure that you're being fair to yourself in this situation. And number 2, if you still want to go ahead and go through with that, you would just say, I've done a lot of reflecting. I've decided what I think is appropriate for me. You want to pick something that is truly appropriate for you. Like, hey, I'm okay with X, Y, and Z. And I just want to let you know I understand where you're coming from. And, this amount of time, whatever that amount of time is that you truly know will work for you, like your sort of bare minimum that's workable, that's what you would share. And then you would just let him respond to that. And you'll see if it's worth it to him with the answer that you've given or the conversation that you're having. If it's worth it to him to make a little bit of that accommodation to you, then he will. And if he doesn't, then it wasn't somebody that was going to be supportive and show up well in the relationship in the first place. So just go in with those things in mind, and then make sure you approach it from that perspective so you're equally as fair to yourself as you are accommodating to him. Great question, Paulina. So Jacqueline says, and then I'm just going to go through all of your guys' live questions. So Jacqueline says, I'm hoping you will catch this before the next webinar, addressing interactions between DA and AA. I was with a DA for a little over a year, and we broke up 2 months into his deployment because he pushed me away emotionally as he could not handle our relationship while overseas. We talked here and there while he was away, but he eventually told me he didn't love me anymore and didn't see a future with me anymore when I asked. Fast forward to a few weeks ago. He returned back to the States and told me about his return via text. We've had little interaction since then. He has not texted me since, though he said we would catch up. He has also been avoiding the gym we both go to. Even our mutual friends have noticed how cold and distant he is. He has been drinking a lot and even got into a fight that required stitches. I assume he has not processed our breakup while he was deployed and is avoiding me to run away from processing his feelings. Great point, Jacqueline. That sounds very on point. All you guys are so aware. I love watching this. I know he is also adjusting back to civilian life. He's a textbook DA in the truest form. My question is, how do I interact with him when he's ready to resume contact that shows him it is safe for him to talk to me? Should I just give him space? He usually responds when I initiate conversation, but haven't quite done so since I'm not sure where his head is at regarding me and life in general. He has never responded to criticism, textbook DA, and shuts down immediately. I'm scared to say one wrong thing, and he will shut down. I'm AA but with a lot of healing work done this time around. Edit. We've had a few interactions, but he's still shut off. I suspect his childhood trauma was exacerbated by his 13-month deployment and is displaying itself as PTSD. Note he was deployed to a non-war zone. He has a fear of abandonment and has told me before he fears being alone. He grew up in a household as an only child where his parents showed no emotional comfort and would send him off to summer school every summer. Sorry, not school. To his grandparents, who also showed no love and emotional support. How should I proceed? Okay, so number one, Jacqueline, or if anybody else in here is in this conversation or in this sort of situation, I would definitely not be in a place where I'm extending myself romantically. Like if somebody directly says something that pushes you away, chances are you're going to go through a lot more of this as time goes on. So make sure you're very careful with yourself and you're treating yourself with respect. I'm not sure exactly of your intentions. You're super aware, but I'm not sure exactly of your intentions. Like you might just say, I want to just be friendly and have a friendship here because we go to the same gym and we have mutual friends and I just want us to be comfortable if we run into each other. And if that's the case, I would just say something really nice to him. I would just say, hey, I'm happy for you that you're back and you're home safely. I know it must have been really challenging there. I know we're bound to run into each other at some point soon. I just want to let you know there are no hard feelings from my end. And I look forward to extending my friendship to you or something along those lines. It could even just be, you can leave that part out if you want, the friendship part, but be careful if you leave that out, that's not you keeping a door open if you don't think he's the right person for you and a healthy person for you. I am all for loving people unconditionally, showing up for people unconditionally, like I really am. As long as we are still loving ourselves unconditionally in the process. If we aren't, then our love for unconditionally for somebody else can be extraordinarily detrimental to ourselves. If we're loving ourselves unconditionally as well, then we show up for like, hey, this doesn't feel good to me, this hurts. And it just sounds like if he is, a super dismissive avoidant, going through PTSD, drinking a lot, getting into fights with people, going through all these things, it just sounds to me like before he's ready to show up in a romantic relationship. And I'm not saying he's bad or anything like that. It sounds like he's got some wounds going on, and I'm sure everybody can relate at some point in their life. I know I can. And it just sounds like he has to love himself and heal himself first before he's ready at all for a relationship. So I just hope that if you extend yourself, it's in a friendly way and in an open, kind way so that you can have this beautiful interaction and have a friendship without having this, having to enter into something where a person may not be emotionally ready at this time. So I hope that answers that question. Okay, so now I'm going to read your guys' questions and go into them. You guys asked great questions. And again, if you ever can't make a webinar, submit those ahead of time if you can into the group discussion. And I will go in there and organize them and get them prepped for the webinar for today. So Jesse says, 6 months after breaking up with a dismissive avoidant, we are in the friend zone. That's what he said after the breakup. But now he's between hot and cold after withdrawing so much previously. I don't know how to proceed. I work on myself. I don't want to chase, but I still want to reconcile things. I went on a few dates with others, but no attraction at all. I'm afraid if I bring things up, he will withdraw again. But without telling my truth and needs, I will just go back to my old pattern and re-traumatize myself. So, Jesse, it depends how warm he's being. But if he's being quite warm, then I would go into a space where you maybe suggest something just very lightly and maybe even a little bit indirectly and see where he's at. And, if somebody says too, hey, this is a friend zone and we're breaking up, because that's what he says after the breakup. And then he's still giving you inconsistent patterns of behavior. It sounds like he's confused about what he wants. And that can just be from some of his own core wounds and fear of vulnerability, those sorts of things. But you're so beautifully saying, I don't want to re-traumatize myself and go back into my old patterns. So, part of that might be holding space for the right thing to come along, the right person to come along, not rushing into things. And if you're going to, walk on eggshells, and then, walk on eggshells for a progressively long period of time, only to, sort of reconnect and then have the person pull away eventually because they're not sure about their feelings. And you're taking a lot of time away from yourself to put into something that may not be the best thing for you in the first place. So I would just recommend, it's really important to show up for yourself, communicate your feelings, a little bit and see where the person's at. But then if the person isn't responding, then, they're not taking to it at all, then you want to be able to retract and hold space for yourself. So that you, exactly like you said, aren't just repeating these old patterns and going through sort of that re-traumatization. So great question. Oh, hi, Tiffany. Tiffany, I answered your question first. I see that you're on here. If you didn't get a chance to see it, I went through it in a lot of detail. It was a great question and it had a whole bunch of good points in there. So it'll be in the recording right at the start of this webinar. We started a little bit early, partially from a miscommunication where somebody put the wrong time out today. And then I was like, okay, this is a great opportunity to answer some of the great questions ahead of time in the webinar, in the discussion forum. So I put them all in there. And yours was the first one that I went through, Tiffany. It might have been the second, actually, but first or second. So Akisha says, I find myself struggling with jealousy a lot with my dismissive avoidant boyfriend. He has done nothing wrong, but he's not always open with me emotionally, so I find it difficult to trust him. It's a great point because one of the single things that tends to make us feel trust the most is when somebody's vulnerable. When somebody's vulnerable and transparent and open, we understand them emotionally, and so we feel like there's this safety. And so, if that's where you're coming from and it's not the trust, one of the things I always say to people is whatever you want to see in your life or in relationships, whether it's a friendship, a family member, a romantic partnership, initiate yourself first. So try to start being a little more vulnerable, share more, ask slightly more deeper questions, try to engage that, because I really do think if there's nothing that he's really done, but then he's not that open emotionally, it sounds to me like the cause and effect are more the lack of vulnerability that are causing you to feel this distrust. And so start initiating you being vulnerable more, making vulnerable conversations safer and easier. And then over time, as you do this more and more and ask slightly deeper questions, hopefully you'll open up that vulnerable connection between the two of you, and then you'll feel like that trust can be built. I start telling my own story in my mind that he's seeing someone else. Okay, good. So I need to question that, but I feel like it's 80% true. So definitely, good job. Good job, you guys. Definitely question your story 100%, right? Even if you think it's 80% true, if you can't know it 100%, don't traumatize yourself with that movie, right? And even if it is true, it's fine if you want to analyze it here, originally, But if you keep reanalyzing it and going back there, you're reliving this trauma or this pain, maybe not trauma, but really painful moment that you have no control over. So I would do two things: question the story, A, and B, if the story is true, if he is seeing somebody else because you think that it's quite true, what do you make that mean about you? And then question those stories. I hope that makes sense. So it means, so let's say, for example, you question, can I 100% know that he's seeing somebody else? What are reasons why he might not be? And not because we're trying to convince ourselves that he's not. We're not trying to delude ourselves, but because the brain naturally, emotionally latches onto the negative story. Because your brain's already believing this one. And how do you know? Because you're emotionally suffering over this one. So you know your brain's emotionally here, right? And so we're just trying to balance the perspectives and bring it back to a space of equilibrium. So just as I'm believing all these reasons why he is, let me question that and look for reasons why he might not be. So I'm at least not latched on at a subconscious level to this side, right? So we question that story first. Then we go to the other side of it and we go, and if he is, what do I make it mean about me? Because those are your real pain points. I wasn't good enough. I'm not worthy of love, whatever that might be, which can be really difficult. Like those will really hurt. Question those. And then you can even take it one step further and be like, what are the potential benefits if he's seeing somebody else? How might that not even be bad? How might that be a good thing for me long term? And just sit with that one for a minute. But I think those are really great things to say. Ruby says, it has been on my mind for a while now. Since yesterday, I'm meditating at least 20 minutes in the morning and nights. Excellent. To stay connected with myself all the time. I feel that this is key in my healing and nothing else matters. I definitely agree. Meditation is so important. I do the same thing. I meditate twice a day, every day. But I know a lot of people who only meditate and don't do work on their stories. And meditation, it's actually usually dismissive avoidance who are meditating. Meditation is more a form of spiritual bypassing or escapism because they go there to just kind of numb out and tune out instead of to go inwards, sit with themselves, be with themselves, notice what comes up, work it through, process it out. So we really, truly want to have both sides in there and be able to sit with ourselves, see what comes up in our stories, work through them, even just reparent and reconnect. But all that stuff is really important. Okay. Shoku, is it too late to connect with them after a year? No, it's not. A hard no, it's not. I think from what I understood that there was a lot of connection between the two of you. And I would highly advise that it's fine to connect, but I would start in a friendship way. And that's my suggestion. Jesse, someone said everything else is noise. I really want to be a great observer of my thoughts. Good. I keep telling myself I am not my thoughts. Good. Using my alone time during the day to work on my visualization of the future. Good. So you're doing a beautiful amount of connection there on both sides. It's wonderful. Hi, Max. Good to see you in here. I'm happy you're here. And thank you again, Max, for just everything. Max is put some really cool stuff together, and I could not be more appreciative than I am. 12,000 out of 10. So thank you, Max. I will be increasing to an hour. Excellent. Good job, Ruby. Yes. Good stuff. Okay, good. So I think you guys are chatting a little bit in here. Do DAs experience a lot of shame? The longer I stay connected in meditation, you're on an amazing journey, Ruby. That's beautiful. Okay, so a couple things. Okay, so Thais, can you please talk about the dismissive, avoidant, and shame, or even make a video specifically about this topic? Do I have a video? I think I might have a video. I titled it something else, but that was a big premise of it. I can't think of what it is, but when I remember it, it was the feelings of the dismissive, avoidant, something like that. I will check that out. It might just be a big part of the course. I'm also doing an advanced attachment style round of courses in January, February. So, I think you guys are really good, really familiar, understand so much. I wanted to put a lot of intense content at the beginning, and there's still a lot more, but I didn't want to overwhelm anybody. So I'm going to do January and Feb. advanced attachment style courses as well, by the way, where I'll talk on like some of these finer topics, like the nuances of attachment styles. And also like, as there's new people entering in the school, some of them probably don't know what attachment styles are. So I had to go through like your big initial course and then sort of the advanced version. So we'll touch on a lot of that stuff in there, because I know you guys just have so many amazing questions, and it sort of opened up this whole new world. So yes, let's talk about dismissive avoidance shame for a minute. So dismissive avoidance, more than any other attachment style, feels shame the most. I actually think it's part of why dismissive avoidance hide so much sometimes, and why they sort of retract and pull back a lot. So, and I've had a lot of conversations with individuals who are very close to me who are either dismissive avoidant or were dismissive avoidant before they did a lot of this work. And they describe a lot of these things that I sort of hypothesized. So I'll tell you about some of them. So number one, where does it come from? It comes from, you have to imagine, in childhood, we're born, we come into the world, and one of the things that we are wired for is attunement. We need to be attuned to our caregivers and feel like they are attuned to us. And if for whatever reason, mom and dad are emotionally shut off, emotionally withdrawn, not emotionally available, maybe because they're going through their own hardships or chaos, or they are both maybe highly dismissive avoidant, whatever the case might be, they are somebody's, I won't get into all the depths of everything, but if for whatever reason there are two very withdrawn parents and there's a lack of attunement, maybe it's tons and tons of siblings, whatever it might be, what can happen is it triggers this like biological fight or flight response in the child that's going, oh my gosh, am I going to be abandoned or not? And we're born with only three fears: the fear of falling, the fear of loud noises, and the fear of abandonment. And that's biologically wired into us because we need that connection. That's how our prefrontal cortex is very underdeveloped when we are born, and it takes a very long time, and we need that dependency on our caregivers so that we can grow and sort of, get socialized into the world to a certain degree and know how to interact and survive. So what happens, this is kind of, I'm probably over explaining, but what happens is when this is not there and there's a lack of it and it's consistent, this young child or even baby, depending on what time this is happening, but generally our attachment style really starts getting imprinted from 0 to 2 years. If there's this lack of this, the child's not getting this like emotional or analytical thought like, oh, my caregiver is emotionally unavailable. So the only thing that they can sort of feel about is, oh, there must be something wrong with me. It's like, oh, we personalize everything as children, right? Dr. Gabor Mate often says like children are like little narcissists. They personalize everything. And obviously it's not quite the case, but there are a lot of sort of qualities that would be deemed that way. So the child comes to feel for prolonged periods of time in childhood that there's something wrong with them. They are defective. They're not normal. A lot of DAs fear that once somebody truly gets to know me and I'm vulnerable, they won't love me because they felt unloved when they were at truly their most vulnerable state. So this is where that comes from. And, usually if we look at like a fearful avoidance shame, usually the fearful avoidance shame is like fear of being bad, like doing something wrong or bad. Sometimes it's like sort of harmonized with guilt in a way, right? And that's still not as bad as thinking like I am defective at my core and deeply at a subconscious level believing that. So they hide from people, they hide from things because shame is the emotion that makes us want to either hide by pulling away and withdrawing or hide by lashing out and taking the attention off of ourselves. And the vast majority of the time, DAs hide through withdrawing. And so they carry a lot of shame. It's a huge subconscious wound DAs want to work on. And that's basically where it comes from in childhood. So I can talk a lot more about it, how to equilibrate it, all that kind of stuff. But those are some really key points for now. And I hope that makes a lot of sense. It's a great question. It's one of their core wounds. So Rachel, hi Rachel, says, I have to see my dismissive ex often because we both have a home base at a specific sports club. I feel he doesn't care about me at all or seem affected that I'm here. I'm there affected while I'm there. Sorry, I think my eyes are a little bit not so good sometimes. doesn't care about me at all or seem affected that I'm there while I'm struggling with it. Still really miss him, want to be with him, as I was not the one to end things. Okay. So number one, dismissive avoidance will almost always seem like that. It's very rare that they show much emotion, happy, sad, anything. They tend to sort of keep that very inward. And they tend to have a great sort of outer protective mechanism that avoids them from being seen in that or with that, right? So I would, number one, take that off. Number two, I would question your stories around it too, right? Like, what am I making that mean if he's not struggling and I'm struggling? Is it that I'm unloved? Is it that I'm weak? Is it that I'm unwanted? Nobody cares about me? Those sorts of things are going to be underneath the surface, sort of at a subconscious level. So source them, bring them to the conscious surface, question them, look for proof of otherwise, right? And you might step outside of the relationship, right? Like, why am I worthy of being wanted, or who does want me, or who does care about me? It doesn't necessarily have to be him when he's not showing all this love and care, but let me not make how he's behaving all about myself, right? Because then it's really painful. It becomes excruciating. So I would do that first. And then number two, if he's not reaching out in any way and he's not the one to end things, I would really be investing my energy into myself and healing from the breakup and moving through it right now and trying as much as I can to like sort of sever any points in my connection with thinking that I need to reconnect with him, or, if he wants to reconnect, he will do something that shows you that he's willing. Yes. Excellent, Max. Guilt for the fearful avoidant. Now, those are the predominant. So guilt for the fearful avoidant is a huge emotion, huge. Shame for the dismissive, huge. But they can share bits of each other. I actually find that dismissive avoidants generally experience less guilt. Fearful avoidants do still experience quite a bit of shame sometimes, though, because they'll have this sort of like I am bad core belief that can pop up. But shame's core beliefs are usually I am bad and I am defective, and one is usually much deeper than the other, as you guys can see, right? So great job, Rachel. From what I understood about DAs, the more they care about someone, the more they withdraw. This is very true. The more the withdrawal mechanism is kicked into place. And it also depends on how far along the DA spectrum they are. If they're super dismissive avoidant, they might just like withdraw altogether. But if there's a way of like having some safety and consistency and connection in a relationship, and that's happening a lot over time, and then something causes them to withdraw, there might be a whole bunch of other internal things going on. So it's not always like quite black and white, but there is a huge association between the more they care, the more they will withdraw, especially like emotionally and anything that's like vulnerable. And the reason is the care is tripping that vulnerability wire, right? And that can make them really need to sort of run away. They seem so sure they are right all the time. I would associate that with confidence in self. I actually find that dismissive avoidants tend to have much lower confidence than other attachment styles. They just have much better, they're very, like, there was a term I used to use that was really, really described it, and I can't think of what it was. It was like a little quote I made up. It was from that little, can't think of what that word is either. It was from that, there's like a little quadrant that says self-confidence, like how secures are self-confident and connected to others. I'm going to try to look it up for a second. Attachment style quadrant, maybe. And I had a little bit of a thing about that because it was saying, for example, no. Okay. Anyways, the whole point of what I was going to say is that like dismissive avoidants they're very like, they self-regard very well. They take very good care of their boundaries well, and they show up for themselves because they're kind of in this like low-level fight or flight. But dismissive avoidants at their core have more shame than any of their other attachment styles, a general rule, and feel like when they're vulnerable and they have to connect, they trust themselves to do that and to be loved the least. So on a surface level, they do really well. On a deeper level, I would say they're the most insecure out of all attachment styles about who they are at their core. Because remember, they almost always, I haven't seen an exception yet, have this deep core belief of something's wrong with me. Hi, Sad. Sad, hello, Thais. I'm a DA and dated an AA for 1.5 years. We broke up 2 months ago. She ended it over a WhatsApp fight and blocked me. It was very hurtful. I'm sorry to hear that happened. Should I reach out to her for closure? Okay, so number one, that's not nice that she did that. That's not a very good way of handling a relationship. So number two, knowing a little bit of what I know about dismissive avoidance, sometimes when they reach out for closure, it's actually their own indirect version of an activating strategy. It's closure, but it's like really to see what's there. So check in with that. That may or may not be the case. It's just a pattern I see. It doesn't definitely not mean that that's your case. So check in with that, number one. Number two, check in with what you really need. And I think I would need closure if somebody ended a relationship after 1.5 years just over WhatsApp. I think that I would for sure need closure. And so, I think most people would. It's always going to be about what your needs are, right? So check in and make sure that's what you need. And then if your intention is truly for closure and not rekindling, I would almost put an email together and say, how you felt about the situation, maybe a little bit about what you went through. It sounds like you must be really working on yourself because A, you just asked a really vulnerable question in here, which is a great sign of moving towards security. And B, you're obviously here doing the work on yourself, which is wonderful. So my advice would be share a little bit about where you're coming from, a little bit about your feelings. If you truly want closure, make sure that that's what it is. If she turns around and apologizes and says, I'm sorry, that was the wrong way of doing things, and wants to sort of rekindle, then you can cross that bridge and decide how you feel at that time. But just go into it being in full integrity to yourself and define for yourself, what does closure mean to me? Does closure mean expressing my understanding and forgiveness and saying, if I ever see you, of course, I'll treat you with kindness and I'd like to move beyond this chapter? Does closure mean truly expressing what she made you feel? Does it mean feeling understood by her by expressing what was going on from your end so that she can come to understanding with you? So define, it's really important when we talk about closure, what do you need in order to feel like you're getting that closure, and define it, and then structure whatever you're going to say in a way that supports that closure that you're trying to receive, your definition of the closure that you're trying to receive, because it's really different for all people. And then just make sure you're in integrity towards yourself the whole time. And if she opens back up and tries to rekindle, then obviously you can make a decision about how you want to handle that as you go through that process. But for now, those are definitely your first few steps. So great question, and thank you for sharing that. Magni says, you said in the last webinar that when DAs are vulnerable and share something vulnerably, they can almost feel some kind of resentment for doing so. So this resentment, does that then lead to them questioning whether or not what they have shared or said is actually true? Like, did I really mean that? Was it really true what I just said? When you say they feel resentment for doing so, is that resentment towards themselves, towards their partner, or towards what they feel they have expressed? Great. You guys have great questions. Well, okay. So usually the resentment is because they don't like to feel vulnerable, and they usually perceive if they felt really vulnerable and it's way outside of their comfort zone. Like usually they'll be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I said all that. I shouldn't have said that. They'll doubt and question themselves. And just like with anything else, the subconscious mind tends to want someone to project that onto, or to source it from, or to sort of blame in a way. And that's where we have to do that conscious unraveling. And so usually what happens when they, and this isn't always the case, but usually when they go through this sort of process, what happens is they feel this resentment because somebody made them feel vulnerable. They didn't like the way that made them feel. And then they tend to want to push away to keep space because they feel like vulnerability is a threat. So now it's sort of this resentment combined with you might be a threat to me in a way. So can that lead to them questioning? Yes, if that questioning is a form of deactivating strategy. What they'll do is they'll go, oh, this happened and this is what's going on. And they'll use that, this person made me open up. It's not always the case, but it's something I do see often. Okay. So the questioning in and of itself can be its own form of deactivating strategy. Number one. Number two, will they question in general if that was actually true? Yes. when they are afraid of being vulnerable and when they have these competing needs. So this part of them that wants to open up, wants to love, and this other part of them that's desperately trying to stop them. They can start to feel really uncertain about their feelings. And the remedy for that is for them to start learning to trust themselves by tuning into their own feelings more repetitively so that they can then experience what their truth is. If their truth is just shooting out in these sort of, far and few between moments, in between the actual like need to protect and deactivate all the time, and they're getting these blips of truth sort of popping up, then they are not going to understand where they're really at. And what that's going to require is a lot of like introspection, self-connection in a more intimate way. And I always refer to like intimate self-connection as like journaling, meditation, things that are truly forcing you to sit and be with your feelings and really connect and see what your patterns are and what your fears are. And as you start unraveling them, you'll get to those sort of like deeper pieces of self underneath, and you'll be able to understand exactly what you're feeling and why. And that will help you to then be able to take action. And so that's basically the remedy you're looking for in this situation. Otherwise, yes, they can absolutely do that. And it's usually a form of deactivating strategy. Hi, Jay. So you're welcome, Shoku. So Jay says, hey, Thais, there has been no meaningful contact with my DA ex for 10 weeks. I'm healing, but there is no closure from her. So I'm creating this for myself. All good. Good job. We live in different cities, so I'll probably never see her by chance. She's partially blocked me from Facebook, but not on, okay, she partially blocked me. She blocked me from Facebook, but not on WhatsApp. I no longer check her obsessively. Good job. I feel a strong urge to do a little goodbye. I let you go ritual and return a few small gifts from her that I've never used. A small part of me wants to remain friends. It seems civilized and honoring what we had, but that may not be realistic. Returning the gifts might provoke her, yes. If you think there's narcissistic tendencies, I would be careful with stuff like that. And I know you shared a few things that were a little bit unhealthy. So returning the gifts might provoke her to block me, speak ill of with a few mutual friends. It may bring finality, but not in a good way. Should I do this? It's a great question. You guys are all asking wonderful questions that are providing a lot of, hi, Jake. Good to see you in here, Jake. That are all providing a lot of probably value and help for people who, to come will be in these courses and wanting to know things like this. So thank you for your guys' great questions that are helping yourselves and helping other people. So number one, there is a chance. I remember just some of the things I saw you share on Facebook. I'm not sure if it was about a friend. I know there was one about a friend. But I think if you have some questions, you've also, said a few things to me as well. And so I, shared some things with me. So I would be careful if you think that this is somebody who's easily provoked. I wouldn't necessarily send gifts back because for sure, I'm sure somebody who's wounded in any way will take that as like, you're doing this to be hurtful or to be mean or spiteful. You're saying whatever. But I don't think it's a bad thing if it feels like you have this little need for closure, but you feel healed and you feel like you're moving ahead, which is wonderful. I think it's a great idea to just send something that's like, hey, I've been reflecting a lot and, I wanted to thank you for what we had. I've had a great opportunity to really heal through this experience. And I just want to let you know there are no hard feelings from my end. And I wish you all the best. Something that's just very like simple and to the point. To sort of let go in a way. And so, if you're going to do something, I wouldn't make it too long because sometimes if we think that the person might be at least very volatile, then they're going to find little things within whatever you say. So the shorter and the more to the point and concise, the less potential ammunition you give this person. But, you want to end in a positive and say thank you and let the person know where you're at and just say, hey, I'm feeling good and say thank you. So I think that's a wonderful approach. And I think it's a beautiful thing that's, the step that you feel like you're at and that you're ready to just sort of, have a final let go. So when you say, this is the other part of Maggie's question. When you say they feel resentment for doing so, is it towards themselves, towards their partner, or towards what they have expressed? Usually it's actually towards themselves and they project it outwards onto their partner. Great question. Shoku says, I have the same question about closure. I feel like I can't meet anyone else until I reach out and get that closure. Then do it. I think it's a great thing to do. Like 100%. Especially Shoku. I know you were in one of the earlier classes, and I know a little bit about your situation, and I think it's a wonderful thing to do, and I think it's the right time, and you can present the situation in a form of closure and say thank you for the connection and the conversations we did have, and I really hope you're well, and just a really positive, a really kind, maybe not just all positive like haha positivity, but like just authentic, truthful, and from your heart is a great space to be operating from. Good question, Max. Ruby, I feel like I can never understand others. Sometimes I think that my ex-partner is DA, and sometimes I think he is FA towards DA. So I gave up trying to figure out and just be who I am authentically, and then attract whoever, and I will just be using myself, and I will just be myself, using the effort and energy into myself. That's beautiful. It's wonderful. Mayor Hal. Hi, Mayor Hal. DA married couple. My wife, AA, just recovered from an illness. I'm sorry to hear that, but it's nice that she recovered. Where would want comfort. Just recovered from an illness where would want comfort, and DA could not provide emotional comfort. DA would have to leave. AA is now better. We love each other. I know you're trying to fit the things into the one chat here, so the short form. All the things that cause our attachment styles are now intensified because of that. Now we are crazy people and don't know how to fix this. I understand. I see this a lot. It's, I sometimes get this little like vision in my mind, right, of like the teeter-totter, and it's like, you have these people who can sort of harmonize and balance with each other and enjoy the teeter-totter, but then it's almost like, it somehow sets off and it gets too imbalanced, and all of a sudden, instead of this little like nice seesaw ride, you've got these like polarities that are really flaring up, and it can become, any AA-DA dynamic can become like almost treacherous this way, and it can sort of speed up and pick up pace. So number one, you want to break the pace. So number one, because you're aware of what's gone on, you're already like your first few steps ahead. So it's great. And if you guys want to take a pen and paper for a moment and maybe just jot a couple of these things down, I'm going to give you a bunch of little things at once here, and you can always come back and rewatch this because it's recorded. And this is great for anybody in this situation because this is a great question and theme for this webinar. So, and for those of you that are of different attachment styles that are here, like secure or FA, just apply these principles to your life too. Okay. So anytime that we're out of balance because there's this like polarity and you guys are polarizing each other, right? Like, and it's sort of, you're bouncing all around. Number one, what you want to do is you want to step out of that. So she needed emotional comfort. You recognize it. You love each other. And you know that this is intensified and you really want to fix it. So number one, I would go and I would acknowledge, I would say, and this is for anybody in any kind of pain point like this, I would acknowledge and I would say, hey, I'm so sorry that this happened. I didn't realize this was truly happening. Maybe you did or didn't know about attachment styles at the time, but I would just say, I didn't really know what to do. I would also add a piece of understanding. It is so helpful or healing for somebody on the other end if they feel like they were hurt to understand why that thing took place. So I'm going to make a stab at this here and take a guess that whether you're aware of it or not, maybe if you were the DA, sometimes when DAs feel a fear of loss or feel a fear of like, something's wrong with somebody, they're in pain, they're not okay, they're going through an illness, sometimes the DA just shuts off because they get afraid and they don't know what to do, or they think they might do the wrong thing, or it causes them stress, that somebody else around them is stressed and they take it on easily. And so for any one of those or a couple other reasons can push away and shut off. And it's often just this unconscious coping mechanism. It can also just be a lack of awareness. Maybe she wasn't communicating her feelings and needs, and she assumes that you should assume what hers are. But both of those are wrong. We can't make assumptions. We all have different beliefs and patterns and programming and all of that. So I would start there, tell her that, and then I would ask her, I would say, I'm not going to be a mind reader, but I really want to make this work. I want us to break, these patterns and these cycles that we're in right now. can you write down for me 3 things that I can do on a regular basis? Just tell me directly, and I'm happy to be able to start doing those things. And I feel that we both have a part in this. I see that maybe my side or my lack of giving more emotional comfort was what started this. But I notice as well that if there's volatility, it makes me shut down more, and it stops me from showing up for you in the way that I possibly could. So do you think I could also ask you to come to me directly and speak about your needs directly and gently, so that I actually have a real opportunity to meet them? Because my knee-jerk response is to pull away and shut off when there's volatility or when there's, chaos. And so, show up for your needs very gently. Take accountability for your part. Hopefully she'll take accountability for hers too, but we can't control that. But if you want this to work, I would start with that. Express, some food for thought that can give her some understanding. And you'll have to do that by going inside yourself and sourcing what that was that created that in the first place, and just being honest. And that's perfectly acceptable. It's okay. And then, here are some tell me what you need on a regular basis. I'll start practicing doing this. And, can we have a needs exchange in return? And that's a great place to start. And then I would also let her know if she's doing any criticizing, that it just sort of feels like you get more ashamed and pull back more. And so it's really important for you to be like, if she wants her feelings acknowledged, validate her feelings, all that kind of stuff, she is to ask you directly for those things. Sometimes when she's criticizing, and especially if she's over criticizing and it's incessant, that's a symptom or a feedback mechanism to let you know this person feels unheard. What they're looking for, what people are looking for when they want to be heard, or they keep over explaining why you caused them pain, or they keep bringing it up, is they just are at the root level looking for you to validate their emotions and for you to say, I see that, I wasn't able to show up the way you needed when you were in pain. And I see that must have hurt. That would have hurt me too. I'm sorry you went through that. But this was what was going on inside of me at the time, and we both have to move forward in a healthy way in order to make this work. So let's look at what we can do. Let's look at the solution and what we need from one another so we can progress instead of keep feeding the problem by going through these cycles. So I hope that that's helpful. And thank you for sharing that. So Jake says, I'm writing a doc to my FAX, owning and saying what I've learned. And it's like 4,000 words. Good for you. That means you're getting your feelings out there. Okay, good. But she's on her DA side, and I want to be deeply seen and vulnerable, but I'm considering it cutting all down. I laugh because I'm like this too all the time. I go to answer questions in the discussion forum, and I'm like, like, I just feel like there's so much to say, and I always work on trying to be more concise. So I want to cut it down, but is that the exact opposite of being vulnerable? So number one, I just want to acknowledge you for doing such a good job of putting your feelings all on paper. 4,000 words is a good chunk of words. And like, that's you processing a lot in there, and that's beautiful. I hope you felt good about just that part of your journey thus far, because it's a beautiful, vulnerable thing to do for you in relationship to yourself. So the next thing is, I would say, does she really appreciate these gestures, even if she is fearful avoidant? Because fearful avoidants do tend to like this deep stuff. They do tend to like the acknowledgement and the awareness and all that stuff. I think you might see, I would, okay, so my initial knee-jerk reaction is like, okay, maybe shorten it if she's on the DA side, just because you almost want to like warm up to those situations. But if she's fearful avoidant and she's just on her DA side right now, it may not be a bad thing. I maybe shorten it down. 4,000 words is what? Like, how many pages? Like 6 or 7 pages. I would try to make it 3, maybe even like 2 pages or less. I know that might be really hard. I'm just trying to think about this. I'm kind of thinking out loud because there's benefits and drawbacks on both sides that are really strong. Number one, okay, I'm just going to say everything out loud that's coming to mind. Number one, fearful avoidant, deep emotional connection, vulnerability, huge benefits for the fearful avoidant. Fearful avoidant, when they're acting as a dismissive avoidant, can feel overwhelmed and shut down. It really depends on like where she's at currently. I wouldn't worry about if this is the exact opposite of being vulnerable, because really what matters is that you were vulnerable to yourself in the situation. And now it's about like, okay, how do I build rapport in the way I present this information to somebody else? How do I try to get heard by making this sort of as likely to be heard as possible. So from this viewpoint, I would go back. I would run through your document. I'd be like, am I repeating myself at all? What are the top 10 things I want to make sure are expressed? And what are the top few things I may want to validate in her? Highlight them, see if there is any way to like write a second version that's like a little bit more concise. But if you go through it and you're like, this is everything that's on my heart and mind, and this is what I want to express, honestly, even if she's on her dismissive side, if she's a fearful avoidant in nature, it's going to really touch her that you took all that time, that you went through all of that. And then I would just follow that up and sort of balance the spectrum by giving her that with your heart on your sleeve, which is just beautiful, honestly. And then just take space. Maybe end the document by saying, I wanted to put this all out here. I really wanted to make sure that I was true to myself and authentic in how I showed up in the situation with you. I'm going to give you as much space as you need. I'm just going to respect your space at this time. I know that if you want to reach out, you will. Thank you for reading this. And just leave it that way so that you're also, even if you could trigger the dismissive avoidance side, you're not really, because you're not trying to say, I need an answer. There's no pressure. There's no expectation. So you just get to sort of put this all there and then sort of take a step back and give her room so that it won't trigger her. And that's probably your best, most balanced strategy of being able to be truly authentic and not trigger the dismissive side at the same time. I had to talk that one out to myself there because there was so much at once. But that's a great question. And I just want to acknowledge you for doing great work. So thanks for showing up to yourself that way. Max, hi. Thais, do you find that DAs actually start to understand that they are loved for what they are in long-term relationships? So they understand and learn they are lovable. Yes, I do. I do see that very much. So as long as they feel like there's safety and consistency, and as long as they start connecting to themselves a little bit, they do, absolutely. I've seen that in my own relationship, and really, like, it's so interesting, like, even the phases of it. I'm probably, like, maybe oversharing. I'm not sure how much my dismissive avoidant partner he's honestly secure at this point, but of course they still have their, like, personality tendencies. But he, like, I just noticed with him, he really, like, warmed up, not just with me over time, but, like, to himself, to his family, to, we have our dog, right? And, he's like the most loving person to the dog. He was already like that, but in just a different way now, even like over the years. So, and I work with a lot of couples, and sometimes there's some really beautiful moments, and they will, you'll see dismissive avoidance like cry and tear up and get like a really soft heart when there's expression, or when they go to say things, they'll tear up and things will come through. Like, they can be really, really, beautiful, and they're very sensitive beneath the surface, right? And it's just trauma that's causing them to protect. So that's all there. It's all their love and their ability to love others, and their ability to believe they are lovable. We all know that, I think, at a deep, deep, deep level somewhere. And so you're just sort of helping that come back to the surface, though it is not your responsibility at the same time. I hope that all makes sense. Okay, I just accidentally, okay, there we go. Jay, DA could be like a persecutor. Okay, cool. Is it typical? Hi, Chelsea. Is it typical for DAs to connect in waves? When we connect, our connection is really strong. He's vulnerable, open, and supportive. Yes. Then there are days he's detached, completely detached. If I start a deep conversation, he'll withdraw and change the subject. Hi, Mark from England. Welcome. I'm happy you're here. Don't worry about being late. We're glad to have you. So I never get stressed about stuff like that ever. So you're always welcome to tune in at any time, anybody. So yeah, there are days. Yeah, that is, to me, that's two things, Chelsea. To me, that's number one, 100%. You'll see that dismissive avoidance, especially if they're working on themselves, which I know he is, they have a good capacity to be open and be vulnerable, but it does seem to be timely in the beginning when the work is beginning, where it's like, it's when they're sort of connected to themselves, they're not too overwhelmed or tired or doing things that are causing them to detach from themselves and thus not be able to attach and connect with you. So that's number one. And number two, I also see that that's probably him becoming slightly more secure. So you'll probably see more and more of the good waves, the I don't want to say good and bad, the attached waves, the connective waves, will be bigger and bigger and stronger, and the less connected waves will be sort of smaller and further apart over time until you'll feel like, okay, this is just secure and consistent, which is wonderful. He'll change the subject, talk a lot about himself, is not in tune to what I'm saying, used to panic me. And I would ask myself, maybe this is really who he is. I can't handle the feeling disconnected. But now I've learned that it's a phase. Once it's done, he comes back. Yes. That makes perfect sense. And he's probably one of the social dismissive avoidants, one that's like an extroverted dismissive avoidant, which are more rare, but like 15 to 20% maybe. And then, yeah, yes. Yeah. And so to me, he's just moving into a more secure space. You will see when a dismissive avoidant moves into a more secure space, they do have like these little anxious moments, but not like volatile anxious, just like these small snippets and then sort of back to the dismissive. But this is very normal of a social dismissive avoidant. I think all these things are like you're picking up that just their patterns. This isn't always going to be who he is. This is going to be when he's maybe a little bit triggered or when he's busy or overwhelmed, and all that energy is going to come out, and you're going to sort of see things like this instead of that presence and emotional connection. The more you guys keep doing the work together as you have been, the more you'll see this start to settle in more and more. So great question. My DA told a friend that he's not going to get in a relationship until he feels worthy of loving himself. I think it makes a lot of sense. And I would definitely reach out, Shoku, at this point, for sure. This is a great point, Ruby. One of my weaknesses was to talk a lot and not listen well. This was due to my childhood. I was unheard. And the brain, remember, the reason I wanted to read this is because the brain tries to equilibrate. So whenever there's a void, the brain registers that void and goes, oh my gosh, I really need to get this need met. And that need to get the need met, which is happening repetitively over time, becomes its own program. And now that program is programmed into your subconscious, and it feels like we go into this sort of overdrive to get the need met in order to equilibrate. And so you point that out. In meditation, it makes it easy to listen to myself very well. And I'm starting with everything with myself first. That's beautiful. And what that's going to do is when we start to meet our own needs, we naturally equilibrate that void more, and things can start to expand and change. And from the inside out, right? Hi, Donna. Hi, Thais. I'm coming to a realization that I began this journey trying to find strategies to make my ex feel safe and be able to work through our issues, but I'm becoming discouraged. I wonder if this continues. The more I learn about DA/FA or avoidant dynamics, I planted the seed in a recent exchange about attachment styles. He indicated he needs to educate himself, but has had little contact since. As long as I'm in a good place, we've been able to navigate this, not always easily, for 8 years, but recent stressors for me pushed me to turn toxic to a DA, implied criticism, neediness, etc. I wonder if I just can't work on this because I can't always be perfect. Can't always be the one to protect him. I think his wounds are too deeply ingrained, but he's so alone now and I want to help him. I just don't know how. Okay, so I just want to point out one thing. It's really important here. So number one, it's beautiful that you're so loving and caring. Absolutely beautiful. Is this, I'm not sure if this is Dina. Because I think I always remember the screen names and then I try to remember who has the name behind the screen name, but let me know if it's Dina. So no matter what, this is what I hear. I just want you to hear your first sentence. I started this journey trying to find strategies to make my ex feel safe and be able to work through our issues. So this is really important, but this is half the equation. The other half of the equation is I have to remove any hurts or pain points inside me that are leading me to be maybe on the codependent side here. And we have a whole course coming out next month about codependency, but and enmeshment. But I hear that you are giving more energy to him, and correct me if I'm wrong because I'm just taking little snippets from your paragraphs. I'm reading between the lines, so to speak. So forgive me if I'm incorrect, but because I'm making like a small assumption, but I hear that it's almost like you're giving all your energy to him and to try to make him, to work through being as appropriate and available to him as possible for his needs. But it sounds like he's not, you talk to him about attachment styles, he doesn't get back to you for a while. It sounds like he's not reciprocating. And in that case, my question would be, if I feel like this is an unfair, imbalanced thing, which it sounds like it could be, then what are the underlying factors in me that keep me going back to that? And let me make sure I put my energy first into that and secondarily into him. And that would be the big shift here. I think that it's important to make, because we can do all the things in the world and we can show up as the best person possible for somebody else. But, then we allow ourselves to be treated like we always have to be perfect. And then we don't make room for ourselves. And then there's always going to be, remember, conflict is born of a perceived imbalance. So whenever I'm putting 110% of effort and then this person's not putting anything back in the tank, that's resentment. Those are the breeding grounds for volatility to take place. That's criticism waiting to happen, right? And you're not bad for criticizing. It's the natural human mind's response over time to perceived imbalance. So if you're coming more from that anxious space, and this is your dismissive avoidant, and he's not willing to sort of pick up the work or show up, I guess you said AAFA, but if you're not willing he's not willing to put any energy back into the tank, then it sounds like it's just not fair to you. And I would work on what keeps me there instead of what else I can do to work and do the work on both of our behalves, because we are each 100% responsible for our 50% of the relationship. And if you're operating at, 110% and you're 50%, and then he's, at 5%, then I would work on, why do I stay? What are the codependent patterns in me that keep me staying with this person who's not serving the highest expression of myself? And why do I justify the actions? Really important space, and great question. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so DA is stressed at work. So always he is stressed now. AA notices he's acting different. DA said it's because he's stressed, but he still loves her. AA notices he's not listening to her and seems preoccupied, and she sees the patterns of this getting more frequent. AA feels crazy, and DA feels like he's doing everything for her, and that should show that he loves her. AA still feels crazy. Okay, so number one, before you get home from work, I would sit in your car in the parking lot at work, or do whatever you have to do. For 15, 20 minutes, come back to yourself. Turn off the radio, turn off any noise, sit with yourself in silence. I know this is going to be the biggest pain in the butt for a dismissive avoidant, but honestly, you're not going to be able to go home and be present unless you do something like this, if it's a pretty drastic time. And you're welcome, Sad. So what I would do is I would take space, sit down, and just with the AC on in the car, whatever, just listen to like maybe the sound of the fan, or be in silence and get back into your body first. Because it sounds like to me, when you're stressed and a DA, you might be dissociating, which is making you unable to be present, just low level dissociating, but not being in touch with your feelings and needs, not feeling rooted in your body in real time. And so then it's really difficult to focus and be present when that happens, which is then going to re-trigger the partner. So again, it's breaking the pattern, breaking the cycle. So here, you want to take that space by yourself. Tell your anxious partner, hey, this is what I'm doing. This is why I'm doing it. I'm going to be home 20 minutes late. You can call me at any time during that time if you're feeling afraid, but I need to do this because I have to get back into me to be there for you. And so I would do that first. You'll hate it the first 3 days. Day 4, you'll start liking it. By day 10, you'll be like, oh, I can't wait for that peace and quiet. So try it, please. And once you've done that, come home, try to be more present. It sounds to me like there's a love language mismatch. You're doing I hear, I'm doing everything for her. Where was it? DA feels like he's doing everything for her, and this should be known that she's loved. And she says, in your words, AA notices he's not listening to her. I hear from that, DA's love language is acts of service. AA's love language is quality time. Quality time is usually about presence, listening, interaction. So I hear that you're giving love in one way and she's expecting to receive it in another, and that's a mismatch. So I would definitely have a conversation about love languages, because it sounds like you're just like not catching each other, like just not like meeting, right? You're like both trying, but you're hitting different ways, if that makes sense. So I would check on that too. And that's a great thing for anybody to check on. What's my partner frustrated about, and how am I trying to do that thing? How am I trying to give that to them? And how can I sort of make a change in return? So I would definitely check on that one too. The love language is peace. And I would take a break, be with yourself for a second so you can come home and be present, because it sounds like that's her biggest pain point. Great share, and it's great that you're working so hard on it. Thank you. And great question. Okay, amazing. Meditation, good. The more, hold on, I'm reading all these sort of things in between here. You guys are so sweet to each other. Can't be the one to protect him. Yeah. And Donna or Dina, I think it might be Dina. When you say too, I'm just seeing the last part of your question. I can't be the one to protect him. He's so alone now. And I want to help him. Usually what we empathize most, this is a great point for everybody. Usually what we empathize most with and for in others is usually our own individual greatest pain point. So when we feel really sad, I was having an amazing conversation with somebody recently who was saying, I felt so helpless and alone to save somebody. And I realized that was hitting such a pain point with me because there was a point of time in my life where I felt so helpless and alone to save myself. And so she then said, I realized I had to go to that space and take the wounds that were associated with that and work those through. And that's what she did. And she's like, it was this profoundly moving experience for me. And so I would just, I just want to use that wonderful analogy because this is really important to just notice within yourself as well. Anna, it's very difficult for me to be vulnerable. I feel like I'm going to be judged, laughed at, and considered weak. So number one, thank you for sharing that. That was vulnerable and you're not being judged or laughed at. That was a beautiful share. And it's something that happens to so many people. I would question the story around it. Is it weak to be vulnerable? Because in my opinion, though just an opinion, it is very strong to be vulnerable in a society that scares us at every angle and space. Oh my gosh, vulnerability is this, vulnerability is that. We live in a society that naturally gives us the messaging growing up through the way we're conditioned, that vulnerability will get us hurt and should be feared. And so I would just take note of that one too, right? Like, I think it takes tremendous strength to be soft in our world nowadays. It takes a lot of courage and bravery to expose yourself and your fears and talk about those things. And for me, when I notice somebody being vulnerable, the first thing I think in my head is like, good for that person. Like, wow, that was wonderful. Like, these sort of, I think it's courageous. So I would check in with that story with yourself. And then when we want to practice being vulnerable, but it's hard, we start with really tiny increments. It's a form of exposure response. So we teach our brain it's okay because, this is a great one. This is already vulnerable. You shared a question on here that was personal. Then maybe after that, you share a question in person with somebody or share something in person with a friend or family member. And then after that, you keep taking these little tiny bite-sized chunks. And then every time that you do it, you want to intentionally let your brain know, hey, that wasn't so bad. Look, that didn't go that badly. That actually felt kind of good. Good job, Anna. Good. And you want to positively reinforce yourself. So your brain is now exposed to the thing that it was fearing. And then once it does it, sees that it was okay, it's still safe, and gets to make a new emotional association to that thing that will equilibrate any old painful emotional associations from the past that are preventing you from being vulnerable in the first place. So great question and great share. Oh, you guys are so sweet. So Magni says, can you tell us some more about deactivating strategies and deactivating thoughts? Great question. So deactivating thoughts can be a form of a deactivating strategy. Does that make sense? When I was doing a lot of attachment style work on myself at the time, now mind you, when I started doing it, I'd honestly already gone through a lot of healing in ways that would help my attachment style. But either way, it's all the stuff I'm teaching you guys from all the different sort of points. But I remembered realizing that as I was going from anxious to avoidant on the spectrum, I remember thinking like, I know these thoughts are familiar. I'm just trying to like push somebody away because I'm afraid it's me deactivating. And your thoughts are doing that. Your thoughts are acting as deactivating strategies. In fact, usually what's actually happening first is somebody hits a pain point or a wound or a trigger. It scares you. A thought interpretation of that experience comes up. You make it mean something, essentially, like we talk about our stories. And then if you could slow your brain down and watch it in real time, right? You're really observing. It's actually the thoughts that are usually happening before the actions, right? We have the BTEA. So there can be these knee-jerk reactions that go right from beliefs to just this like outward response. Very rare. Usually it's actually you have these deactivating thoughts, which then are producing the deactivating actions. So they're all basically in the same bucket, if that makes sense. And it's a great question. And no, that makes sense. Don't worry. Donna, which I think might be Dina, said, my chat broke up. Sorry, all. It won't make sense, but it made perfect sense. I know because I see the chat. I'm always behind because I'm answering questions. So I'm always like not at the bottom yet. Yeah. So then it makes perfect sense. I know I can tell when they're jumping because you just couldn't write it all. It's perfect. I also think showing vulnerability is a sign of courage. Yeah. Oh, somebody else said that then, which is awesome. Not the friend, but the ex-lover. Yeah. It's a silk scarf. Jay says it's a silk scarf. It was a simple message. It was to be a simple message, just like you said. I think that's beautiful. I think that's perfect, Jay. That's wonderful. And good for you. It just sounds like your healing journey is going so well. And you should be proud of yourself for being at that point and taking healthy, conscious actions and just being really aware. So Max says, Anna, great. Oh, you're so sweet. If you need any support, we're here. That's really sweet. Yeah, you guys are wonderful. So Joku says, shall I tell him how I felt and what I experienced too, or let trigger him? I never let him know how much the whole thing hurt me. It almost feels like we had to separate so we could learn about ourselves to heal and that we were both on our own journeys. That it might have been a gift in that way. Sometimes people come into your life to open you in that way, right? And in a way that's to expose you to this part of yourself, right? And my answer to that is absolutely. Everything I know about your story the whole time, I would just say in past tense because it's not triggering if that happens, but I don't think he's going to be triggered at this point. I think that he was probably going through some of the same things. And I think the explanation will give a lot of understanding and help a lot. And I think you won't have to sit, with that in your heart anymore, thinking what if, or, I don't think anything hurts as much as regret, right? So being able to at least put it all out there, just share what was really going on will not only give you a whole bunch of closure, but also give this person some understanding, which could bring things back in a way. But it definitely sounds like you guys both had to go into your own spaces and connect and learn and work on yourselves. And it might have been a gift to bring you back to yourself in a way. Sometimes relationships are catalysts to wake us up to ourselves. So beautiful. Thanks, Ruby. So Marcelo says, my ex-DA blocked me on social media, no contact with me for over a year, and has not deleted photos of us on her social media profiles. Is this a mechanism to tell others not to approach her? A mechanism to tell others not to approach her, and B, sometimes the dismissive avoidance way of holding on to nostalgia. Sometimes when they do feel something and they're a little bit hurt, sometimes they have a bit of a hard time letting go, so they leave those photos up. Now, I don't want to say just read right into that because that's a pattern. It's not always the case. But usually there's a bit of a thread that's still there for that person as a general sort of rule. And they want to keep you away to protect themselves from being vulnerable, but they want to hold on to you on some level as well. So I hope that makes sense. And it's a great question. And I'm sure you guys have all had some kind of relation where you've seen that or that's happened, or I'm sure that's a common thing to be on the giving or receiving end of doing. Shoku says, oh no, that was part of your old question. Max says, tell you something which would be interesting is to see the distribution of how many people in your school or of each attachment style percentage-wise, who the content should be tailored to. Yeah, I check in a lot with that kind of stuff. I don't mean to spy on you guys, but I really want to make this like as good as possible for you guys. So like I didn't even plan on doing a codependency and enmeshment course anytime soon. There was a whole bunch of the attachment style advanced courses I wasn't going to put out till like June, July. I'm going to put them out January, February. I'm always trying to like hear the feedback and listen. So I go in sometimes and I look at like who's doing which courses. which courses are people choosing first, because I can do them in the platform. I don't like go in and look at your quizzes or anything like that. I try to respect everybody's privacy, but I just look to see like which courses are important to people and how can I make sure I keep tailoring content that way to you guys. And as always, like, so I appreciate that point so much, Max, because it's wonderful. And as always, like the more shares like that and the more things you guys want to see, just let me know. I take inventory, I have notes about everything, and I'm constantly adapting, because the whole goal is to like serve you guys and make sure that you get the most out of this experience, and whatever you need on your healing journey, you're supported, or just your growth and expansion journey as a whole, that you've got a lot of ongoing support. And so just always let me know, and definitely going to do that. So Rachel says, any tips for reattracting a DA? X, since you were saying I need to let him reach out to me, he felt as an AA I was too needy, couldn't self-soothe. How can I show change? I know I can't initiate. Okay, so the first thing I would say is that it's really important to make sure that you connect to yourself first. So it's really important to make sure that you, when you're doing this, that you get the opportunity to make sure you're healing your own inner work first, and that you're feeling really whole before you go there. Because it's like saying, if there's not a match because, you know, whatever the situation might be, and then I try to go and convince the person that it's time, but they've said, hey, in my needs from a relationship, this is an important thing, I might go in inauthentically. So I would definitely practice self-soothing first. And it's in the AA course, but one of the most effective ways to do this is, to constantly write out through the day your own feelings and needs and check in with them. And then constantly, and I suggest for 21 days, only meet your feelings and needs from yourself. I don't mean in like across all platforms, like only meet the social connection from yourself. Like I don't mean anything like that. But what I do mean is things like that are immediate, like, ooh, I need connection. Okay, I'm gonna journal or write or process my feelings first, and then I'll go meet them with other people. And you want to sort of go to yourself as the primary resource for 21 days, and that's the act of wiring in self-soothing. And as you do that repetitively, then I would go, and also then when you go to re-engage, you can just say, hey, I've done a lot of work on myself. I really appreciate the suggestion about me self-soothing. I've taken courses, I've grown, and I just really want to thank you for that. And if then he's interested, then he'll respond. But then at least you're in a space where not only are you whole and not as dependent on the outcome of what he says, but you also show up authentically. So if he turns around and is like, yay, let's be together, you are ready for that relationship inside out, right? So that's beautiful. And just make sure you're super fair to yourself and your own needs the entire time. But great question, Rachel. Okay, it's not Dina. Sorry, Donna. I apologize. There was somebody with a similar screen name that was here, and she had an orange icon too as her picture. So this whole time I was like, oh, I think that might be Dina. She was in one of our courses before the online version of the school opened. So I just wanted to make sure. And Donna, great questions and shares. And I just hope that you're very loving and connected to yourself this entire time, and that you're showing up for yourself first, so that you're not entering into a space where you're doing the work for both people, because that will always feel hard and always feel difficult. So let's see what else. That's awesome, Ruby, that you're doing that. That you're doing your vision board and vision of the future and all of it. It's beautiful. Thanks very much, Chase. I wouldn't have learned the 4,000. That's awesome. That's amazing, Jake. I'm so happy to hear that. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you, Anna, as well. I'm glad that you are appreciating the personal examples. Max, I don't have a cat. I just have a dog, and his name is Simba. He sort of sometimes acts like a cat, though. I will say that. he kind of looks like a half dog, half cat, and he's all cuddly, and he's really cuddly like a dog. But he does little cat stretches and jumps on the back of the couches and things like that, kind of like a cat. Thais' cat. You mean my cat? Yeah. Okay, I'm just reading these comments in here. Yeah, social DA. Yeah. So social DA, I'm just going to say this. So I don't know if I've like explicitly said this, and this is Chelsea's comment. There are social DAs. So there's dismissive avoidants who are very social, but they are more rooted in social connection than emotional connection. So what you'll see is these people who are social DAs tend to connect with many, many people, and they tend to be great with people, but kind of in small doses. It's like they're here, they're here, they're here, they're here, they're here, they're here, and it's almost like they have this high need for connection, but emotional connection and the vulnerability doesn't feel good, and they want to keep that big strong wall up. And so they go to all these little people and get all these people in little doses and get like little tiny bits of connection from everybody to get their connection needs met in a way that's safe for them. So what you'll notice about these individuals is that they tend to talk a lot about, like, they can be really intellectual, talk a lot about like current topics, trends, politics, surface conversation, anything that's not too vulnerable, and that they're naturally good with people, need a lot of stimulation, get energized by people a lot, they're extroverted, but it's all happening in a way that never makes them too vulnerable. Does that make sense to you guys? It's a really great question. Hi, Shelly. Okay, so Shelly, I see that you said, let me just see here. I see that Shelly said another thing that is making AA feel crazy, but I don't see anything before that, Shelly. So I just want to make sure that sometimes if you try to type too long of a question, it won't submit it to the forum. And unless you changed your name in here, I don't see an earlier question. I've been trying to be as careful as possible to not overlook. And if I ever overlook anybody's question, you can always reach out to me and let me know. Sometimes there's the letters are kind of small for me. So I'm always doing my best. So if there's ever a time where I miss anything, let me know, or repost or anything like that. And I apologize in advance. But Shelly, I just really looked. I don't see an earlier question. So just make sure it got submitted in here. Do DAs often cry when they are angry instead of getting angry? This can happen for sure. Because DAs do not often express anger. They can sometimes, but really as a general rule, there are exceptions to this rule, but as a general rule, they do tend to repress their anger a lot. They do tend to have like a sort of coping mechanism where they repress anger, and they sort of put like a blanket over it, right? And it's at a deep subconscious level. Usually it's something that took place quite young. So sometimes you will see them cry instead of getting angry. Absolutely. I don't want to say especially and be stereotypical, but just as a general rule, probably from the way that males versus females are conditioned, I tend to see DA females definitely cry before they're ever going to express anger the vast majority of the time, because they don't tend to like conflict too much. So let's see what else. I feel Superman is human. Okay, cool. I know you guys are chatting. Do DAs project their resentment towards themselves onto their partner? Yes. That's what I was saying earlier. So it's like they can take this inner resentment that they feel towards themselves and then project it onto their partner for making them. It's at a deep unconscious space, but it's like, oh, you're making me feel this way. You made me be vulnerable. And now, and it's really them resenting themselves for violating their own boundaries, even though that actually might be a step towards healing. And they're judging it from a fear-based space as violating their own boundaries instead of opening up. And it's actually a step towards healing. I hope that makes sense. Yes, look at that. See, Max? So Max says, I just love this topic, but Max and Ruby are talking about like movies and stuff. And Max is like, my sister likes to watch those movies too. I used to watch them too a lot. I realize now that was to meet subconscious needs. And that can be for connection. That can be for lots of different things. Emotional connection. It can be for just entertainment. All kinds of different stuff. So great points. Okay, so I'm going to answer 2 more questions, then I'm going to have to run. And for those of you who came on at 3:30, I did start at 3, just answering some earlier questions. We had like a slight miscommunication about time. And so my assistant put out 3:30, and it was supposed to be at 3. And so I was like, I'll just start early and answer questions on the forum. So you guys have just access to all the questions being caught up on that are on the forum, especially the ones that are like super valuable. And then also questions through here. So you can always start and watch the recording if you want that extra bit of information and got here at 3:30. So Marcelo says, question, my DA blocked me on social media. Sorry, I already answered this. I think sometimes you guys think I'm not as far ahead as I am as well. Thank you, Max. I appreciate that. So I think I answered that about how it's usually a thread. Sometimes I'm just catching up to you guys still a little bit. Let's see. AA explains why she is acting crazy through explaining our attachment styles. In the explanation of situation, DA feels criticized by the explanation. Okay, good. See, this is so typical. Yes, Shoku, absolutely. Hi, Jacqueline. Nice to see you here. So okay, I'm going to answer a couple more questions in here. So Mayor Hal says, AA is explaining why she's acting crazy through explaining our attachment styles. In the explanation of the situation, the DA then feels criticized. And AA explains how she's not criticizing. So just right here, point number 1. You're feeling criticized. So it doesn't matter, right? So you're feeling criticized. So it doesn't matter why she's trying to prove to you that she's not criticizing you. She's the way the situation's happening, you're emotionally being imprinted in the form of criticism. It's not her fault, but why she keeps explaining, because you say, and she repeats this over and over and over. What's happening, right, is she's just trying to get heard. She feels unheard, so she keeps repeating. You're registering that as criticism. This is extremely common from the AA-DA dynamic. And so what you want to be able to do, right, is tell her, hey, I need you to restructure what you're saying. And this is in the conflict communication course inside the school in like such detail. It has to go like this. I interpreted your, this situation. Sorry, I interpreted, okay, hold on. Let me backtrack. I'm going too fast. Let's say there's a situation that takes place. The person who's hurt by the situation, let's say the AA in this dynamic between the two of you, has to say, hey, when this situation happened, I interpreted it in my reality as me not being cared about, as me being unloved. It has to be, I made it mean, because it's really coming from this person. And that's how it takes that personalization away from you. So it's, I interpreted it as this, and then I felt this way because of my own interpretation. We want to take the you out of the dynamic at all so that your ears don't register, not your ears, but your subconscious mind doesn't register it as criticism. That's step 1. You're going to start hearing her, and that vulnerability and criticism core wound won't be tripped if she structures or frames it that way. Step 2 is then you want to follow up and you want to validate her feelings when she does it that way. Oh, I see why you would feel hurt in that situation. It's never saying that there's like right and wrong, like you hurt her, you're bad, she's good, nothing like that. It's about just recognizing that, hey, if you're carrying those wounds and then somebody does something that touches those wounds, you're going to hurt and it's going to feel like what you felt. And I get it, because we are so, when we're arguing, we're just trying to connect our realities and feel understood by one another. And the moment you validate her emotions, you'll see that she stops repeating herself. And then when that happens, she's going to start feeling connected and happy and grateful. And you're going to receive that warmth, and then you're going to feel safer. And now you're positively spiraling instead of negatively spiraling. Okay. So really, this is so characteristic of the AA-DA dynamic. And listen, you guys are in here and you're doing your work. So these are very solvable problems for you guys. I feel really strongly about that. So great questions, and thank you for sharing. And I'm glad to hear that, that you're learning so much. So thank you for saying that. Okay, so I'm going to answer one more question. Somebody said it's my data. It's your data. I don't know. People. Oh, I see. It's your data. I see. Thank you. Hi, Sasha. Nice to see you guys. Jacqueline and Sasha, welcome. And Sky Goddess is here too again. Thank you for sharing that, you guys. It's like my questions are being answered without asking. It's because you guys ask fantastic questions. This is a beautiful share too. I asked a question in the Q&A forum that I could use your help with. Not sure if you answered it. I think I answered that either yesterday or today. I went through a whole bunch because there's two parts to the form, and I obviously kept clicking on the first part. Oh, I'm trying to think. So I answered, it's definitely answered. I think it actually might have been, Jacqueline, the third question that I answered in the webinar today. It's either answered in the forum or in the webinar in the first half hour. So I got here half an hour early today, and I just answered any of those questions that weren't answered in the forum yet. And and it was a bit of a longer one. It was a really good one. So I went through, I read the whole thing. If you don't mind, I don't think I said your name, but I read the whole thing. I know it's in the forum anyways, and this is a private group, but I read it all and then sort of picked it apart and went through it in a lot of detail. So I would just replay the forum like this once, because it's recorded. I would just replay it so that you can go back and watch it, because there's a lot of detail in there. And thank you for asking that question and for sharing. Okay, so let's see. How do you know if your DA isn't a narcissist? Okay. Hi, Sasha. How do we know? This is a really good question. Somebody asked this earlier too, and I have a video on that where I actually go through like the actual DSM traits in there that are the characteristics of a narcissist. But one of the I'm just seeing you guys talk about my dog, which is cute. Okay, so one of the big, some of the defining characteristics, Sasha, since you missed it, were DAs can be sometimes a little bit more on the taking end because they're living in a survival orientation, right? They're more in fight or flight. And when any of us are in fight or flight, we tend to sort of like hoard more our energy, our resources, our money, whatever it is, right? When we're out of fight or flight, we're in parasympathetic mode, we have an easier time sharing and giving. So because DAs are more chronically there, they can be more on the taking end, but not necessarily the entitled end. They don't necessarily feel like everybody owes them. It can sometimes appear that way because they kind of take, but it's more like a survival response than it is like a, oh, everybody should just give to me kind of response, if that makes sense. Also, DAs are not grandiose. They do appreciate like validation and approval, but if anybody gives too much to them, they actually move in the opposite direction. They feel like it's overwhelming. They'll shut it down, that kind of thing. Versus narcissists, they need supply. So they will all the time want more validation, more approval, more acknowledgement, more everybody knowing that they're special. They love the center of attention. DAs don't really like the center of attention. Maybe little tiny short periods of time, but then they tend to like shared attention, or to even sometimes be hanging more in the background. DAs tend to be quite blunt with their boundaries and quite honest and need a lot more time alone. Narcissists don't tend to have great boundaries a lot of the time, but they will have like, it's not that they don't have great boundaries. It seems like they don't, because a lot of the time they're sacrificing their own boundaries to basically get approval from other people a lot. So those are some other big things. Dismissive avoidants don't usually have a lot of interest in manipulating others. They usually just, if they feel unsafe, run away or like take space instead of like manipulate. Narcissists can be quite manipulative. So those are a few of those core characteristics. In the video, I put a whole bunch in there. But because you guys are asking that, I figured I'd just explain that again. There's some really key points in there. Okay, so I'm going to answer this last question, then I really do have to run. So if a DA is very enmeshed with parents or one of parents, how can this affect their romantic relationships? Do they often feel and act inauthentic because of this and resent their partner for it? Yes. If they're enmeshed still with a parent, they have a really difficult time in romantic relationships. That's a really great question. A really great question. So the reason is DAs already feel like they are lacking. They not lacking, but they already, just like if anybody's ever in a fight or flight response, okay, let's say you just lost your job, you are moving and you have so much to do and you don't know, you're moving across the country or to a new place or anything where there's like, you get into that kind of sympathetic nervous system mode for a day or two, then what happens? We, in that space, start to withhold our energy, whether we're conscious of it or not. And we're trying to sort of protect ourselves, right? So what happens here is when we go into this situation where we're withholding our energy and we're trying to kind of protect ourselves this way, what takes place is that we already feel like we're in lack. Now, I want you to imagine the dismissive avoidant is almost always in that space. And then imagine that they have a parent that they're enmeshed with that has all these expectations from them, that has all these, things that they're putting on them. Naturally, because there's this enmeshment, and if it's from a parent, it's been occurring forever. It's wired in at a deep subconscious level. This individual, the child, through this enmeshment, feels like a lot of their energy is already being drained. And so they're always operating at this big deficit according to themselves and their own sort of like subconscious mind and zone. And so now they go into romantic relationships and often feel already drained and already afraid. And then they usually also feel like they have to equilibrate their authenticity somewhere, because usually there's an inauthentic part of all of us if we are in an enmeshed relationship. On some level, it's robbing our subconscious mind of its authenticity. And sometimes that inauthenticity in that parent-child relationship will then try to equilibrate itself and balance it out in our other relationships. So then sometimes people will often be overly authentic or try to overvalue authenticity if there's an inauthentic place that's existing in their lives. Usually when any client I've ever seen historically who's like authenticity, that's pushing it too much, one of my first things is, okay, they're equilibrating from somewhere where they're being inauthentic. And it can just be a lie to themselves that they're telling, something they're avoiding, acknowledging about themselves, or owning an enmeshment piece somewhere that they're trying to, make up for somewhere else by being overly independent, because there's this dependency in this enmeshed space. So that will just exacerbate and magnify any of the DA qualities, and it'll make a dismissive avoidant relationship a little bit more difficult to be in. So I hope that makes sense. And I think so Shaku, I don't have a course on conflict resolution just between AA and DA, but that's when I do the advanced attachment style courses in January, February. I'm going to be adding all the nuances of the different relationship interactions and go through a lot of the core things that are in the programs already. So I hope that makes sense. And you guys have amazing questions in here, and beautiful shares and everything. Do DA people gaslight? Only when they are, sorry, these are great questions. I'm going to answer one more. They don't gaslight. Gaslight is like saying, they can, but it's rare. It's like saying the sky is purple when we all know the sky is blue, right? Or like trying to disprove something, like tell you something didn't happen that did. When it's them with their feelings, denying their feelings, is usually because they're in denial in themselves and they're so afraid, and the experience of them feeling their feelings is blocked by all this fear. And that's usually what's taking place there. Not that they're intentionally trying to manipulate you. Gaslighting is also usually a form of intentional manipulation. Like, hey, you knew that this happened, and even though we both know this happened, I'm going to tell you it didn't happen. I'm going to keep telling you. And usually gaslighting is associated with narcissistic behavior, as opposed to gaslighting being a self-denial or an inability to deny my own feelings or experiences because I'm afraid. So I hope that makes sense too. It's a really good question. Thank you so much, Thais. I feel ecstasy per moments now with my healing. That's really beautiful, Ruby. And Ruby, thank you for being such an amazing student of this and student of so many different things on your own as well. I know you're just learning, and for bringing that valuable and powerful information back into the group and sharing and helping others along their journey as well. So thank you guys so much, all of you, Shoku and Magni and Jessie and Donna and Ruby and Sasha and Efrat. I didn't say hi to you. Good to see you here. But yeah, thank you guys all so much for being here and for your amazing questions. I loved this webinar. You guys shared so many exciting things. And just a reminder as well, if you ever can't make one, put your discussion questions in the forum. And I'm always going to start the webinars by just talking through and touching on some of those. So thank you again so much for being here. And I hope you all have an amazing rest of your weekend. And thank you again for just being a part of this journey. I'm just honored and blessed to be on this with you guys. So thank you. Have an amazing rest of your weekend. And I'll see you guys on Tuesday. Bye. Bye, Saad. Bye, Max. Bye, Anna. Bye, guys. Thank you. Bye.